Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. In some ways, the COVID-19 pandemic helped modernize education in North Carolina. Most of the state's 1.5 million public school students were issued laptops, accelerating their technological know-how. It enabled virtual learning, made it easier for students to access assignments, and, in some cases, expanded course offerings. But computers for all might be becoming computers for some in the coming years. WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst is here to tell us why. Emily, good to see you again.
Great to be here.
Emily, take us back to the days right before the pandemic. Computers were in classrooms, but not in the hands of every student. What did that look like on the ground?
Right, so you might have seen, a computer lab, and that's really kind of where the computers are. Before the pandemic, there was kind of an increase in, laptops or mobile devices being carted to classrooms. Maybe certain classrooms could get them or certain classes would get them. But we also did kind of see a movement toward this idea of one-to-one classes. That's something that's been talked about in education for a long time, but was kind of a pipe dream. Where they wanted every student to have a device. And you might hear about this or that school system somewhere else in the country that had a laptop for all students, basically to learn every day. And that was really more of a dream for a lot of school systems in North Carolina. Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools actually was able to pull it off before the pandemic, and they weren't the only one, but It typically was very rare. It was something schools dreamed of, but they just didn't have.
But then the pandemic comes around. We have a lockdown. Kids are trying to take classes from the couch. And there's almost a need to have a computer in the hands of every student. How did that all come together?
Right. So North Carolina received over $6 billion in temporary federal assistance, the COVID stimulus, or ESSER, some people call it. And essentially, that just provided all kinds of money to help schools adjust to remote learning, pandemic learning conditions, et cetera. So one of the first things they did is they put in these bulk orders for typically Chromebooks, but they could have been some other devices. Basically, they wanted these laptops so that they could issue them to students and they could take their courses remotely. Not everybody got a laptop right away because there ended up being such a backlog with manufacturers because every school system in the country was trying to buy all of these devices. So gradually, students were able to receive them. Some students had to be on paper packets for a while, especially kids in rural areas where they just didn't have home internet access. But basically, it just allowed this dream to come true. I mean, schools spent I think $500 million or so on computer equipment, which included the laptops.
So, now that we have this giant, great leap forward, you're reporting now that this might not last forever. Why is that?
Right. Well, so I just said it was $500 million on computer equipment. A lot of that went toward laptops, if not all of it. And, that's just a lot of money. You just don't come into that kind of funding. And a lot of it was just all at once. So let's say these devices give out all at once. That is a lot of money to just come up with. So these school systems, basically most of them don't have it, except for like Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools where they had a funding source before the pandemic. That was private funding. They had donations that helped them fund that. So the Department of Public Instruction has been surveying the school systems, like, can you actually replace these laptops when they give out? And the most recent survey was April through June of this year. And by the end of June, DPI had heard back from all but one school system and then almost all charter schools in the state. And the vast majority of them said, we don't have the money to replace them.
And that's because the pandemic funding was one time and it dries up come September, right?
Right. September 30th is the last day you can use it. Almost all of that money is gone at this point. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, a month on this, and it's going to almost all dry up. And it was all one-time funds because it was intended for temporary needs related to the pandemic. That could have been masks or hand sanitizer back when maybe there was a fear that COVID was more transmissible on surfaces. And, schools spent a lot of money on extra staff and, bonuses for people taking extra shifts and doing more things. And, that money is almost all gone.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll find out what school systems are doing to keep computers in the classrooms. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about the future of computers in North Carolina classrooms. Emily, these laptops help many schools modernize out of necessity, sort of offering a way to teach during these lockdowns. But there have been other benefits for schools too. What else are they able to do now that they have laptops in the hands of more students?
So it's been a big deal as far as, even just kind of simple things. Bad weather, kids have to go home. You might have a remote learning day. That's something schools try not to do because kids really love snow days. And it's also just kind of, it's not perfect because there are still kids who don't have home internet access, but it's something you can do if you have, especially in Western counties where they might have, several snow days in a year. So there are, things like that you can use these laptops for. Kids can access assignments when they're sick at home. They can go, okay, what does Google Classroom say my assignment that I missed today was? And you can access it pretty easily and just kind of follow along that way. So there are, practical things like that, but also, when kids are able to use the devices in class, they can also often use them in ways that allow teachers to kind of gather more data on students more quickly. So I talked to a teacher who said, these students, they can take these tiny assessments, and the assessment, they can immediately deliver back, okay, this kid did well at this, not so well at this, not so well at this, great on these other things. And the teacher can go, okay, well, I know what I don't need to focus on as much. I know what I need to focus on more. And then they can easily tailor something, send it back to the kid, or maybe, do more personalized instruction. But basically, kids being able to do things on devices and all of them being able to do it at once can really speed up the process of the teacher, figuring out what to do. We've also seen kids with devices being able to complete assignments in class, or if they have a virtual teacher. That's something that some schools have hired. They haven't been able to hire an in-person teacher, so they contract with a company that basically provides a teacher who just kind of beams in, and kids can use devices to send messages to that teacher if they have questions, things like that. So there are a lot of different ways that the devices are used.
Now, you spoke with one parent who said this has changed how their kid learns and sparked some new interests, right? What'd they tell you?
Right. So, that basically she said that the devices kind of make it easier for kids to do certain things, but also just kind of explore interests. So it makes it easier for kids to do research for research projects, or maybe even in their downtime. She talked about how curious her son is about geology and geography and how he spends all this time looking that stuff up now. And she thinks having a device has really helped him engage those interests. Her daughter has become more technologically savvy. Actually, both of her children have become more technologically savvy and can use the devices to explore more of those interests. Now, she admitted, there are probably some downsides. If you have some downtime, you might use the computer to look up all kinds of things you don't need to know, Wikipedia pages of celebrities or something like that. And so she recognizes they're not perfect, that they need to be used strategically. And that's a big thing that people talked about is devices need to be used strategically and not just, all the time just because it's just so easy to have a laptop.
Now, kids aren't easy on equipment. Backpacks get thrown and kicked and stepped on. With the funding situation, what happens now when a laptop breaks?
So when a laptop breaks, different school systems might have different policies. In some places, they might be able to repair it or issue a new one. In other places, they might say, well, that's it for you. You don't get another one. So it kind of just depends on the school systems. There are some where they don't let students take them home. So, that could make a big difference that, you wouldn't probably be able to do much remote learning on a snow day if that were your policy. But, they do that with the intention of they just don't want kids breaking them. Or they require a deposit for repairs if you want to be able to take them home.
Now, there are also some security risks with older technology. Are schools doing anything to protect against that as they try to sort of stretch the life of these machines?
So they all have security software, and that's pretty critical. If you don't have security software, you can't really use them. So the problem with some of the devices is basically a lot of the devices that people bought were Chromebooks, and the problem with Chromebooks for a while was that the software on Chromebooks was only supported by Google for 4 years. So the laptop itself might still be pretty functional and just fine, but the software basically won't be supported after 4 years. So if your software doesn't update, a lot of times that'll cut off your security. So your security won't run on systems and things that are too out of date. And if it stops running, that's it. And there are school systems that have just had to recycle or throw out the devices entirely because even though they turned on and you could still access the internet, they didn't have security.
So what's the solution going forward? Schools can't, put Band-Aids on these things forever. Is there a plan to fund computers going forwards, or are school systems just going to go back to how it was?
So there's actually some good news. So I just mentioned that Google used to only support Chromebooks for 4 years. They made an announcement in November, so not that long ago, that they were going to support them for 10 years. That they had been facing a lot of pressure from a lot of different people about, hey, these devices can last longer than 4 years from a hardware perspective. If only we could get them to last longer from a software perspective, it would save schools money. And it would just be better for everybody. It would be less wasteful. And so Google said, okay, well, we're going to support them for 10 years. So we'll have to see if the hardware really lasts that long. I've spoken with experts who said that the physical parts to help repair a Chromebook are actually kind of hard to come by compared to other laptops. So we'll kind of see if a market opens up for that. That's a little better or easier. Solutions might be to, look for more funding sources, look for public-private partnerships. Maybe you whittle down access to computers. So maybe you say, okay, well, I think we can find the money to have a laptop for all high school and middle school students, but maybe for elementary students, we scale that back. And so not every elementary student gets a laptop. So those are some ideas. And there's also pressure to use more state technology funding toward those things. There is a funding source that's supposed to support school technology, and so schools are getting money from that funding source, but there's a whole lawsuit over backlog of that funding source that schools weren't getting money for several years, and that had a pretty high dollar figure to it. But again, that's just it would not, if schools suddenly got that backlog relieved, that money would eventually run out too.
Well, I know you'll be watching closely and updating us along the way as this develops. Thanks, Emily.
Of course, glad to be here.
That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst for her reporting on the coming computer crunch. Go to the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.